Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most important hadith narrations from the Holy Prophet of Islam, and that is said in his final Hajj a few months before he passed away, in a crowd, a large crowd, and he rose the hand of Imam Ali alayhi salam. He grabbed his hand and he mentioned this word Mawla, that Ali alayhi salam is the Mawla of the believers. Let's examine this authenticity of this hadith first, and then let's second of all examine the meaning of Mawla. What does it mean? And third of all, let's examine some of the objections to Hadith al Ghadir. When you examine hadith, the first thing that we do is that you examine the authenticity. Did the Holy Prophet of Islam say such a thing? Is this sahih? Is it correct for me to attribute this to the Holy Prophet of Islam? So the first source we're going to go over is from Shamsuddin al-Dhahabi's book, Siyar al-A'lam al-Nubala. Shamsuddin al-Dhahabi is a historian, is a hadith expert in the 12th, 13th century. He has the book, The Lives of Noble Figures, Siyar A'lam al-Nubala. In it, he is talking about looking at Hadith al Ghadir, and he mentions, actually the word is interesting here, we're going to be using this later. He talks about this hadith as being Hadith al Ghadir al-Khum. And he says here that فَبَرَهَنِي سَعَةُ رَوَايَاتِهِ. For me, it became conclusive evidence upon the amount of narrations there are, the numerous narrations there are. وَجَزَمْتُ بِوُقُوعِ ذَلِكَ. And for me, I have become convinced from the fact that this event took place. So you have jazm and yaqeen. So these, therefore, when you come to study hadith, either hadith is sahih, it's correct, but it could be hadith that is wahid, that it doesn't have enough chain of narrations for you to be convinced. You can attribute it to the Prophet of Islam, but it doesn't give you yaqeen, doesn't give you jazm, doesn't give you certainty. Then you have a hadith that has so many different turuq and so many ways of chains of narrations that there's no way you say that the Prophet of Islam did not say this. So therefore, we're looking at this hadith being mutawatir, causing jazm. So let's study this hadith according to one of the greatest scholars of hadith, according to Ahl Sunnah, Sheikh Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani. He says this, he says, وَجُمْلَةُ الْقَوْلِ أَنَّ حَدِيثَ التَّرْجُمَةِ حَدِيثٌ صَحِيحٌ بِشَرْطَيْنِ. It talks about that this hadith مَنْ كُنْتُ مَوْلَى, is sahih, is correct, according to the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. So this is a sahih hadith. Actually now, he says it's even higher, the first part, مَنْ كُنْتُ مَوْلَى part. He says, فَعَلِيٌّ مَوْلَى. بل الأول منه متواتر عنه صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. Actually, the first part, من كنت مولى فعلي مولى, this part is actually متواتر عنه. It means that it is a mutawatir hadith. It brings conviction, it brings certainty that the Prophet of Islam said this. So therefore, there is no way to actually go against this hadith. And when it comes to did the Prophet of Islam say it or not, you have al-Dhahabi from the 12th, 13th century. In the 20th century, you have Sheikh Nasiruddin al-Albani saying it's mutawatir. Not only is it sahih, as we said, there's a difference between sahih and mutawatir. Sahih means it's correct, but mutawatir means that actually you have jazm and you have yaqeen that the Prophet of Islam said this. So let's now talk about the meaning of this hadith. Let's read this hadith together and see what does it mean, because this hadith is undeniable. But the indication, the meaning of a hadith is the second step of hadith. Let's read this. I'm going to read for you from Sunan of Ibn Majah. And we have this hadith, which, as you see here, it is from Nasir al-Albani. Actually, has some commentary here. He says it's a sahih hadith here. And I'm going to read. You see in green, it says sahih. And now the yellow part I'm going to read for you. أقبلنا مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم في حجته التي حج فنزل في الطريق فأمر الصلاة جماعة فأخذ بيد علي. So the narrator Bara ibn Azib says this: we returned with the messenger of Allah from his Hajj that he performed, and we stopped at some point on the road. He commanded the prayer should be performed in congregation. Then he took the hand of Ali and said this: فقال ألست أولى بالمؤمنين من أنفسهم? Do I have not more authority to the believers than themselves? قالوا بلى. They said, indeed. قال. Again the Prophet of Islam asks, ألست أولى بكل مؤمن من نفسه? He asks, do I not have more authority over all the believers than himself? And they said, قالوا بلى. قال. Then he says, after getting this sentence and getting this testimony from the believers, this man, فَهَذَا وَلِيُّ مَنْ أَنَا مَوْلَى. This man is the master of those whose master I am. Allahumma waliman wala, Allahumma adaman ada. O Allah, be a guardian of those who takes him as a guardian, and take as an enemy those who take him as an enemy. So when you want to understand the meaning of Mawla, in this hadith from Ibn Majah, this Sahih hadith, very clearly you see, and other actually, for example, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, others bring this hadith just like this, very similar to this, with this sentence that the Prophet of Islam is asking, Alastu awla, do I have not more preference? Do I have not more authority to the believers than themselves? So because this word awla, right before talking about Mawla or talking about Wali, we understand that Imam Ali alayhi salam, the meaning of Mawla here, or the meaning of Wali here, is different than the other possibilities, which is friend, or which is a sister, an aid. Here we're talking about authority, we're talking about governance, we're talking about wilayat, which means to be in control of the believers, to be a successor over the believers. How is this so? When you look at the Holy Quran, another proof that awla or awlawiyya here, which is, these words Mawla, Wali, and awla all come from the same root word. So when you want to understand what Mawla means here, you look at here. An-Nabi awla bil mu'minina min anfusihim. You look at the Holy Quran, 33:6. The Prophet of Islam asks this question because this is a statement in the Quran. It's a statement in the Quran, and he's asking them basically about this verse. An-Nabi awla bil mu'minina min anfusihim. The Prophet has more authority over the believers than themselves. When you look at tafasir and you look at commentators of the Quran, you look at Tafsir Jamul Bayan of Tabari. Here he says, Ahaq bil mu'minin bihi min anfusihim. He says that awla here means what? That the Prophet of Islam has more right to the believers than themselves. Or you look at, for example, Ibn Kathir in Tafsir al-Quran al-Azim of Ibn Kathir of this verse 33:6. He has here that means what? أولى بهم من أنفسهم وحكمه فيهم كان مقدما على اختيارهم لأنفسهم. That his hukum, his judgment, his ruling upon them is muqaddam, has priority, has preference, is before over their wants, their deeds, over themselves. So here you have commentators of the Quran. One say ahaq and one say muqaddam. So either the Prophet of Islam has more right over the believers, or the Prophet of Islam in this verse has more priority. So that is what awla means according to the Mufassirin in this verse. And that is the same verse that the Holy Prophet asked them. So therefore it becomes clear without any doubt that Mawla comes from, and Wali comes from the word awla before it, and that is used to mean authority, holder of authority, to have more right, to have more preference. And that all comes to the fact that Imam Ali alayhi salam has walayat, just as a divine guide, a prophet has walayat over the people. Their successors have authority, have priority, have more right over them. Because why? They are sent from God. Prophets are sent from God, and the successors are sent from God. Therefore, they are awla. Therefore, Imam Ali alayhi salam is our Mawla. He is sent from God, and he has walayat over us, and he has authority, and he has, therefore, very clearly, he has priority and preference over the believers. Now let's go to the common objections from Ahlul Sunnah about this hadith. Objection 1, okay, we accept Mawla. Mawlawiyat means, it comes from awlawiyat, and that means a holder of authority. It means he's your ruler, he has authority over you. Okay, Imam Ali is the first ruler. We also have Abu Bakr, we have Umar, we have Uthman, we have Muawiyah, as some say. And therefore he is one out of these many, one out of the four, one out of many. So therefore he is one, and the others are Mawla too. It's okay. He's just, the Prophet of Islam is telling us he's going to be one of your Mawlas. How can we answer this? So we look and examine the hadith according to the Prophet of Islam. Did he appoint Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, or anybody else as his successor besides Ali? Do you have a hadith showing me that Abu Bakr should be the Khalifa of the Muslimin? He should be the Mawla of the Muslimin from the Holy Prophet of Islam? They say no, we do not have a hadith. So therefore, the rest, besides Imam Ali, do not have a hadith, do not have a strong evidence pointing to the fact that the Prophet of Islam showed that they should be the ruler after him. They should be the successor. So you have Imam Ali, that is a legitimate successor, ruler from the Holy Prophet of Islam, and all the other ones would be illegitimate because the Prophet of Islam did not appoint them. When you appoint one person and you don't appoint the others, is it right to follow the others that they have not been appointed by someone? No. So therefore, he's not one of many, he's just one of one. That's it. That's the answer. The second objection is this, is that this hadith, it has a different context. You, the Shia, you are changing the context of this hadith. This hadith comes from a story, in the story of Yemen, in the Battle of Yemen, and Imam Ali taking spoils of war and upsetting one of the companions of Islam, and therefore Burayda specifically, and he becomes upset because Imam Ali took more spoils of war, or took a spoil of war that he wanted, according to this hadith. And therefore they come to the Holy Prophet of Islam. Then they mention this hadith of Mawla, and therefore Mawla here means friend. And therefore the Prophet of Islam is just teaching them, don't hate Ali, don't hate him, love him, because of the context that we have here. So what is the answer? Our answer is this: you're mixing two hadith together. There's actually two hadith, it's not one hadith. One, you have hadith of Ghadir Khum, one you have the hadith of Burayda, which is actually called hadith of Walaya. Two hadith which have two different places. One took place, Burayda's hadith, when he comes to the Prophet, takes place in Medina, takes place in the Masjid al-Nabi. The other hadith takes place in Ghadir Khum, two different places, two different time periods also. One took place before Hajj, either in the 8th year of Hijrah or in the 10th year before Hajj. Hadith al Ghadir happened after Hajj. So there are two different time places. Or you see in this hadith from Al-Mu'jam al-Awsat of Tabarani, mentioning here that Ba'atha Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam aliyan amiran ala al-Yaman. Ali was sent, and I'm just going to show you this part. فَقَدِّمْتُ الْمَدِينَةِ وَدَخَلْتُ الْمَسْجِدِ. So he entered Medina and he entered the masjid of Rasulullah. Then the Prophet says to him, وَأَنَّهُ وَلِيُّكُم مِّن بَعْدِي. Then he says, he is for sure that your wali min ba'di. So therefore, clearly this hadith in Al-Mu'jam al-Awsat is saying the place is different. One is in Ghadir Khum and the other is in Masjid al-Nabi. Another answer we give too is that this is private talk. The other hadith of Ghadir is actually a hadith that is in front of everybody, in front of Nas. They prayed Salatul Jama'ah. And then he mentioned this. Why is the Prophet going to talk about a specific hatred of Burayda and when it happened way later, even though we're talking about the location was different, the time was different, he's going to talk about a specific matter in front of Jama'ah, in front of Hajj, the last Hajj, in front of everybody. So that doesn't make sense either. Even if we agree, let's say we agree, okay, this is one hadith. But this hadith that you're mentioning, the hadith of Burayda, is actually another very, very strong proof for the walayat of Imam Ali. We're going to read right now in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, hadith of Burayda at the end. It's Inna Aliyan. It says, the Prophet of Islam says, Ma turiduna min Ali, ma turiduna min Ali, ma turiduna Ali. What do you want with Ali? What do you want with Ali? What do you want with Ali? Inna Aliyan minni wa ana min. I am Ali, for verily is from me, I am from him. Wa huwa waliyu kulli mu'minin min ba'di. And he is the wali, he is the holder of authority of every believer after me. This hadith has the clause min ba'di. So after me. So therefore you cannot say it means friend. It cannot therefore mean it means, a sister, because it says min ba'di, after me. So okay, even if you accept the context of this, but you're bringing a hadith that has the clause min ba'di. This clause is so strong. That's very interesting. Ibn Sa'd, a historian, a biographer that is very trustworthy according to Ahl Sunnah, that actually he lived in the 7th, 8th century, and he has this book called Tabaqat al-Kubra. In Tabaqat al-Kubra, which is actually a book which in many times he goes against the Shi'as. So very interesting, Ibn Sa'd says this, فَقَالَ لَهُ الرَّافِذِي. Rafidi is a term that is not polite, that Ahl Sunnah, some of them use against the Shia. أَلَمْ يَقُلْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ لَعَلِي مَنْ كُنْتُ مَوْلَاهُ فَعَلِيٌّ مَوْلَاهُ. So the Shia says this hadith about, مَنْ كُنْتُ مَوْلَاهُ, whoever I am the holder of his authority, Ali is the holder of authority for him. فَقَالَ أَمَا وَاللَّهِ أَنَّ لَوْ يَعْنِي بِذَلِكَ الْإِمَارَةَ وَالسُّلْطَانَ فَلَأَفْسَحَ لَهُمْ بِذَلِكَ. I swear by God, if the Prophet of Islam meant Amara and Sultan, if it meant leadership here, rulership, leadership, he would have made it very clear. He would have made it very fasih. كما أفسح لهم بالصلاة والزكاة والصيام رمضان وحج البيت. Just like the Prophet of Islam makes salat, praying and zakat and charity, alms and fasting and hajj, made it from very clear. He would have made it very clear. He's saying Man kuntum Mawla is not sufficient. It's not very clear. He would have said this. وَلَقَالَ لَهُمْ أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ هَذَا وَلِيُّكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِي. He said, "O people, he, Ali ibn Abi Talib, is وَلِيُّكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِي." This is what he would have said. Actually, Ibn Sa'd, unfortunately, that is what the Prophet of Islam did say in another hadith. So Hadith al Ghadir, he says, Man kuntu Mawla fa aliyun Mawla. In Hadith al Walayat or Burayda, he says this same sentence that you're saying. It's not fasih enough. It's not clear enough. He actually does say it, and you have hadith, sahih hadith, in many books. And I brought you that example in Tirmidhi, and you see that it is a sahih hadith. So therefore, if you're trying to use this hadith of Burayda to bring the context to say, no, Mawla just means don't hate Imam Ali, that the Prophet felt sorry for him. So we answered, we said, first of all, these are two occurrences. That's one's in Ghadir Khum, one's in Medina. Time, place is different. Even if we agree it's one hadith, this hadith that you're mentioning has the clause min ba'di, and even according to Ibn Sa'd, that would be one of the clearest, that would be a clear way to appoint leadership. Law sallamna, even if we accept that Mawla means friend, that Imam Ali, for whatever reason, from everybody, the Prophet of Islam, even though it doesn't make any sense, in front of thousands of people, some say 100,000 people, in front of all these companions, last Hajj, farewell Hajj, rose the hand of Imam Ali, whoever I am his friend, Ali is his friend. Let's just assume, or whoever I am is a sister, Ali is his sister. Which doesn't make any sense because Imam Ali is the brother of the Holy Prophet of Islam. Higher than that. Let's just assume this Mawla here means friend. Even this amount of the hadith, of this mutawatir hadith, did you act upon it? Did you act upon loving Imam Ali? Did you act upon liking Imam Ali? If you accept Ghadir as mutawatir and say the meaning is love and liking, then how can you accept Muawiyah to be your ruler? How can your scholars accept Muawiyah? How can you accept Bani Umayyah? They fought against Ali ibn Abi Talib. They cursed him on the pulpits. for tens of years. So therefore, how can you accept the battle of Jamal when they fought against Ali ibn Abi Talib? How can you accept the first and second Khalif when they came, and there's a testimony, there's evidence that they came to set the house of Imam Ali alayhi salam on fire? How can you accept this with Hadith al Ghadir? Therefore, Hadith al Ghadir, with the lowest amount of meaning of Mawla, it is enough to discredit the system of Khilafat. Because when you really analyze it, Muawiyah and Bani Umayyah, they did not love Imam Ali, they did not act upon the saying of the Holy Prophet. It is not enough for you to say it is ijtihad. That is not a place of ijtihad. You have clear evidence here. Ghadir is clear evidence. The very minimal meaning to love Imam Ali alayhi salam is clear evidence to be with him, to love him. And therefore, Hadith al Ghadir, it cancels and voids the system of caliphate, because they were not with Imam Ali. They fought with Imam Ali, the Bani Umayyads, Muawiyah, and even from the beginning, they fought against Imam Ali, and they came to set his house on fire. So therefore, Hadith al Ghadir, Mawla, comes from the word, is interpreted from the word, the sentence awla. And we looked at awla. Awla means to have more priority, to have more right, to have preference. So therefore, Imam Ali alayhi salam is the Mawla of the believers. He has authority over it. He has to be followed, and he is the successor of the Holy Prophet of Islam. And this is the way of salvation. This is not only a political challenge that we have. This is, where are you going to get your deen from? Are you going to get your deen from Ali ibn Abi Talib? Are you going to get your religion from Ali ibn Abi Talib? Are you going to study the hadith of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the true successor of the Holy Prophet? Or are you going to get your deen from others? So therefore, we ask Allah, inshallah, to guide us. We ask Allah to connect us more to Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, so we can learn from him. We can act upon his sayings, inshallah, because having him be our Mawla is one of the most important commands of the Holy Prophet of Islam. Take care, brothers and sisters. Thanks for joining us, and keep us in your du'as. Goodbye.